Looking at the agenda for today's session, we'll be spending about 5 minutes for an introduction to TalentMap. Then we'll be spending about 20 minutes looking at what and why and how of Pulse surveys, what they really mean. And then we'll spend about 10 minutes on TalentMap's Pulse. And then we'll reserve about 10 minutes or so for questions and answers at the end. So having said that, I'm going to let Sean drive the presentation for today.
Good, thank you, Bernie, and thanks for the bit of an introduction there. And for today, I'm going to try to touch a little bit about TalentMap and what we do, and quickly touch on that. I noticed some people on the webinar today are new to our organization, and that's new to our webinar series. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much for joining. And I want to just briefly tell you who we are, and then I'll get into the what, why, and how of Pulse survey. So it's a real interesting topic because it's a topic that's been growing in requirements and used by our clients and by the industry as a whole. So I want to touch on what we're seeing and what we're learning out there, and the sort of high-level overview of Pulse surveys and how they're approached. Also want to touch a little bit about our Pulse survey and what we've seen working with clients directly. So I think that might be helpful to give you a sense on that. And then, of course, if there's questions as we're going through, Bernie, you'll be able to take them as we go. And of course, if there makes sense to put those questions at the end, we'll put those right at the end. All right, so let's jump right into it. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in engagement today and what we're seeing out there. And I always thought picturing sort of engagement within this context is very interesting. And I think if you sort of look at what's the gap that's causing such a divide between how we perceive or want to be engaged in our work and where organizations are today. And I think what's happening, I think the quote on the left there, you know, we live in 2015 in terms of technology, always on, always enabled, transparent communication, direct communication. But for many organizations, we work in 1970. We haven't changed our thinking, our approach, our philosophy towards engaging and communicating with employees. And I think one tool that we're starting to see are Pulse surveys. And I think, like you're going to see in a couple of slides I'm going to talk about later on, a couple of ideas I'm going to talk about later on, there's lots of different experiments going on out there to try to bridge that gap between the level of engagement we want to be at and where we're actually at in today's organizations. And hopefully we'll see a little bit about Pulse surveys and how they fit into that role. One of the roles of TalentMap today is really to help create a higher level of focus on the human capital metrics for executives in our client organizations. And I think one of the biggest challenges is as executives, we don't focus enough on probably what is becoming the most critical aspect of our business. If you look at sort of a typical executive's brain, if you could sort of peel back the brain and sort of look inside, here's what you probably would see. Most of the focus and time is spent on financial metrics. So they pay a lot of time at what the finance looks like, and that's where they focus. They might look at operational metrics, like I call them value chain metrics here, maybe some customer metrics to some extent, and whatever's left over they might give to human capital. So they really don't give an equal weighting to what I think is probably deserves more attention. What we'd like to see is the executive brain more like this. Yes, financial metrics are important, operations, customer, but just as equally important, particularly in today's economy and our knowledge-based economy and service-based economy, I would argue human capital metrics are becoming as important or more important than financial metrics. But the average brain of the executive is more on that on the right-hand side, and they still are paying too much attention as a percentage to financial metrics and not enough to the human capital metrics. And our job as a company, and the things that I do, Bernie does, Louis does, and others on the call on TalentMap side, is really try to provide tools that can expand the percentage of time that executives pay attention to the human capital within organizations. Just a quick overview of TalentMap, and then I'll get into the pulse. By the numbers, TalentMap has been in business for over 15 years. So we've been at this area of employee engagement, employee measurement for quite a few years and gained quite a bit of experience over the years. We've run well over 1,000 engagement projects across the world, mainly in North America and Western Europe. And also lots of employees in our benchmarks. So we've been able to deploy the same sets of questions across a large number of organizations and been able to compare companies to similar size, similar industry, similar geography. For example, we have benchmarks on associations, on healthcare, on high-tech firms, a whole range, financial services, and so on. And we have a range of different products. I'm not going to be talking about our products today. I'm going to touch a little bit at the end about our Pulse product, but really I'm going to talk about the overall view of what Pulse surveys are like and what we're seeing in the workplace now. And we also provide a lot of follow-up or post-survey action planning. One of the things we've learned over the years is technology is great and they can provide useful tools to enable data collection, but the most important thing is acting on the results. So we've provided action planning consulting services to help support our clients post-survey. We've also written a book called The Engagement for Dummies. We partnered with the Wiley publishers to publish that book, and we provide it to our managers and clients as a tool to help them learn more about engagement and build what is important, which is human capital metrics. Just a quick snapshot, we range and work with a whole range of different clients in healthcare, government, engineering, technology, consumer products, financial services. We also have had the opportunity to run a number of best employer programs, Canada's Top 100, Employers' Choice Awards, in addition to the work that we do, and it's given us great insight to what's not only happening with our clients, but what is happening on the national stage around some of the best employers out there. We're also members of some key institutions and organizations, and that's important around any survey that we do, that we're providing a very professional approach to our work. We're members of CASRO, and that's important for survey confidentiality. Because we're bound by a code of ethics and provided by CASRO, and we pay attention to that code of ethics, we're very careful on how survey data is used, provided, and we really do respect respondent confidentiality. Members of SIOP, we're doing really interesting work over in the UK with Cranfield School of Management around employee engagement, and also some longitudinal data that'll be out in a couple of months from the Conference Board of Canada. So they've used our database to go back over 10 years to understand what's happened in engagement and what companies have done to improve engagement and sustain engagement at a very high level. So just the last slide on TalentMap, and then I'll jump into the engagement on the Pulse side. When we work with our clients, and this is relative to the Pulse, so I'm going to come back to this model in just a few minutes, but generally most of our projects are designed to measure engagement, and our model's based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the concept of at the very top is engagement, and that's what we're striving for. And all the underlying factors below engagement are the factors that can drive engagement. And if you're doing those factors well, like teamwork, leadership, management, you tend to have high scores on those, which then in turn drive high scores on engagement. And we're able to give our clients an overall sense of where they stack up on engagement out of 100, and how that compares to a benchmark in their industry, how effective all their different practices are, and also what the most important drivers of engagement are. And these drivers are important because for a lot of Pulse surveys, this is what they come back and survey on, and I'll be talking about that in a little bit around how the key drivers are used to measure and follow up with Pulse surveys. So that's a little bit overview on us and how we fit it all together for our clients. We know that, you know, if you're a private sector or even if you're not-for-profit, you often pay attention to things like revenue growth on the right-hand side, profitability, and customer or member or stakeholder satisfaction or patient satisfaction if you're in healthcare is really critical to that. And part of what plays that role, of course, is your product mix and your strategic positioning. But a big part of what plays that role now more than ever is employee engagement. because we know engaged employees drive higher levels of productivity, improves discretionary effort for the employee, and reduces turnover and improves overall retention, which then drives customer value, and that drives better satisfaction. When we work with our clients, what we do is we measure all of the factors underneath engagement, and these factors, and what we do is we tell our clients how these factors impact engagement, which then can improve, and that drives the values of productivity, effort, and retention, which turns into customer value. I'm going to just stop there before I jump into Pulse. Bernie, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking about this. So in your experience, Sean, do organizations launch Pulse surveys on a regular basis or more of an occasional strategy for the company or organization?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm going to come to that, and one of the points I'm going to touch on here in a little bit is to timing of the surveys, when they're made, and it's a variety. So I will touch on that, but that's an excellent question. All right, so why Pulse? Why have Pulse surveys become popular over the last number of years? And I think one of the things, if you look at what's happened in employee engagement, and there's this tool on Google. Google's a great service, not just for search, but for lots of other services that they provide. There's this thing called Google Trends. So if you type in google.com or google.ca, Google Trends, and you get this application, you can type in these keywords, and then it'll tell you how those keywords have trended over a period of time. What I did is I looked at the word or phrase employee engagement. And when they first started tracking on Google Trends, it started in 2004. Now we're up to 2015, so almost 10 years of data on employee engagement. And what's interesting is you can see, I know there's ups and downs each quarter and each month, but it has consistently tracked upwards. So employee engagement is definitely gotten a high level of attention, and it's certainly a hot topic amongst not just human resource professionals, but amongst executives as a whole. And I think the trend in terms of the number of searches being done really bears that out. And I think what we're seeing is people are a little bit frustrated with how to measure engagement, but also how to act on engagement. And they're starting to turn to different tools to do that. And that's where I think Pulse Survey comes in. It really comes in as another approach or another tool to try to understand and measure engagement in a different way. Let me just tell you a little bit about a couple of tools that we're seeing out there, and then we'll focus on the actual ins and outs of a Pulse survey. I thought this was interesting because this is an example of a company. It's Deloitte, and Deloitte has developed this concept from moving from a career ladder to a career lattice. And the idea of, the old way, you'd sort of start maybe in marketing in a junior role, and then you'd move up to maybe a more senior product manager role, maybe a director and a vice president and so on, or in the operations side, maybe on the line, and then into a shift supervisor, maybe a regional manager, and more of an operational role, so depending on the line that you are in. And that's really what we say, and that's not engaging people. So what Deloitte is doing is they're trying different methods. They've created this concept of a lattice. And the idea that not only can you move up and down within your function, but it's okay and encouraged to move laterally. So maybe you start in marketing for 2 or 3 types of roles, but then you want to move over to a different role like in operations, or in operations you want to move over to finance. The idea of a lattice allows different direction and allows organizations to be more adaptable. So that's one way, and Deloitte is a good company, one of our partners actually, so we do a lot of work with them. But Deloitte's interesting because they recognize that career growth and career development is one of the underlying factors that drive engagement. And the old model doesn't work, so they've tried different things to try to improve engagement. Other things that we're seeing around trying to drive higher levels of engagement. Here is an office over in Norway, and it's actually a stand-up office. So there's actually no seats, no chairs, no place for anyone to sit down. And this concept is the design of some architects over there, and the belief is that if people are standing up or on their feet, they're going to be more aware, more blood pumping through their veins, and more engaged. So I thought that's very interesting. Again, other organizations creating different environments to try to enhance engagement and try to drive engagement to higher levels. You know, a lot of these places that they have over here, it's interesting because you can lean against stuff, but you can't sit down anywhere. I'm not too sure if I'd want that in my office location, but again, it's interesting experiments that are going on. One last experiment that we're seeing in the workplace before I turn to pulse surveys. This is really interesting. It's called the Jolt. And it's a company. If you actually go in and type in, you know, Jolt or Jolt Up, and you'll actually get the company. It's a company that manages workflow and checklists and so on, really used well within the hospitality and retail industry, food industry. But what they've developed is this concept of a wristband. And this wristband sends an electrical shock to the person wearing the device when, you know, he or she's not been adding any tangible value to his or her company, and, you know, in 12 hours or 6 hours or whatever the time can actually be adjusted to the preferences of the client. But I thought this was very interesting. We're not going to try this anytime soon in our office, but what it sort of tells is how much people are experimenting and organizations are experimenting with ways to engage their staff. So not only are they doing surveys, but they're doing lots of different things. Now, how well these things are going to work out, stand-up offices, different organizational structures, or electric shocks, I'm not too sure. Some of them might work out very well, but that's all part of the process. You have to try things and experiment with things for them to work. For us to learn about what's going to work and what isn't. So now let's turn to pulse surveys. So I think it's important to define what a pulse survey is, and the very first thing is it's a different approach than a traditional employee survey. Typically, when we talk about a pulse survey, it's brief, of course. Hence the word. It's more specific in goals, and it's conducted typically on a predefined employee group. What's interesting is because pulse surveys are fairly new to organizations, you know, over the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years, there's no one standard definition or approach to what exactly a pulse is. It sort of can be derived a little bit from that idea of the medical concept, where a full survey is a full medical checkup. You go into the doctor and they do all the tests on you and so on, where a pulse checkup is maybe going to a clinic at your neighborhood, you know, region, and doing a quick check of your blood pressure or your cholesterol level or something like that. You know, that idea of do you still have a pulse? Are you still healthy? Are you still active? I think is where some of the terminology came from. But what's specific about a pulse? It's really a technique for gaining a limited piece of information. So it's often limited, but the benefit of it, it's done so it can be done very quickly. So limited information, but done very quickly. And probably the information is limited. If you sort of looked at, there's two areas, and it's one or both that the information's limited. It's either limited in terms of content, in that there's a fewer level of questionnaire or questions that you ask in a pulse survey, or it's limited in terms of generalizability. Sometimes pulse surveys aren't as statistically valid or reliable to generalize to entire populations, and that's because maybe they're done on a random sampling or they're done to a smaller subset of people. So usually shorter questions and not as generalizable as a full survey is. So quick definition of what engagement is. Let me move to the next concept. I think one of the reasons why people look at engagement surveys is because primarily you want to be able to find the smoke in the organization before it burns out into a fire. And the idea is really, you know, your managers being able to identify hotspots or concerns or emerging or smoldering issues that are out there, and the pulse survey can identify it through the smoke of what's going on, And if you run surveys, you're running them frequently enough on a pulse that you're actually able to identify it before it becomes a full-blown issue within the organization and can cause irreparable damage. So I think that's sort of some of the underlying reasons why we're seeing the growth of pulse surveys. If you looked at some of the benefits of the surveys, I think one of the things, it gives organizations time to react to emerging problems before they get worse. So the idea of identifying if there's smoldering issues before it becomes a real hot topic. The other value of a pulse survey, it certainly helps keep issues on the table as part of an ongoing daily discussion and decisions about running the business. I'll give you an example. We have one of our clients run quarterly pulse surveys. And it's only on a set of engagement questions, and I'll show you what that pulse survey looks like in a little bit. But what's been valuable for that company is it's kept the concept of engagement, the awareness of engagement. It helped them define engagement within the executive team to a much greater extent than an organization that just decides to do a survey every year or every 2 years, when for some of those organizations, the concept and discussion around engagement only comes to the forefront around the survey period, around the survey time. So it certainly helps keep the issues on the table. It allows measurement of issues that are hot for executives. So if an executive has a timely issue or a hot issue that they want to understand better, pulse surveys give you that opportunity to go out and ask. So another example is a large hospital we're dealing with. They're implementing quite a large change management and e-records system, and they are doing short pulse surveys just prior to the launch of the software in the different business units, and then briefly after the survey or the software has been launched, they're going back and actually pulsing employees about how it's being accepted. So a change readiness survey, handful of questions, and a follow-up survey. So again, very simple but useful tools to help executives get better information. And a couple of other things.
Interrupt you for a quick moment. A question just came in related to how we get the buy-in from management. So how do you handle a case where a HR manager wants to do a pulse survey, they're doing an annual engagement survey or biannually, but they want to get the buy-in from management to give something a little more specific, a pulse survey that's targeted towards what they want to achieve. How do you, help them get the buy-in from management from that point?
Yeah, that's a good question, and some of the benefits outlined on this slide can help start to build the case for that. Probably one of the benefits that you could outline for managers is two things. Typically, pulse surveys can be very cost effective. So what we're seeing is the cost, because of the technology, and most pulse surveys are run online or presumed to be run online, the cost of deploying it, collecting it, reporting on it is often much more attractive than running a full survey. So the investment needed is much lower. And the other thing about it is we're seeing anecdotes used a lot in explaining the benefits to executives. And the reason why we're seeing anecdotes, so stories or little case studies being used to explain the benefits to executives and how they could be used, is because there's not a lot of academic research that actually can tie changes in pulse surveys to changes in business performance or improvements from feedback on pulse surveys, because they haven't been around that long. They haven't been used that much. They haven't been actually studied. I did an EBSCO search, which is a database of academic journals about employee engagement and pulse surveys, and I didn't get any peer-reviewed journals on there. So there's not a lot of literature or research you can point to. All you can do is try to find something that's hot or interesting for the executive, and understand for the executive, a lot of these tools can be done very cost effectively. The other important thing for executives is explaining that when you're deploying a pulse survey, the expectation amongst employees and the expectation around executives is actually lower than it is in a full survey. So the expectation that you're going to act on everything right away is much lower. So the understanding and how you communicate and how you position the pulse survey is different from how you position a census survey. So there's some things like that, positioning of it, hot button for the executive, and the cost is reasonable, can be some very useful points to help drive the executive towards a HR's way of thinking.
Those are a couple of great points. Thank you very much, Sean.
There are some drawbacks. So, as much as there are benefits, I sort of want to sort of give you also, what are the concerns you should be thinking around pulse surveys? One of the concerns is that they are tools. There are survey tools out there, SurveyMonkey and Survey Gizmo, and all these different tools out there, and they're great tools. But they also can enable inexperienced professionals to develop surveys. So you might be a HR professional, seen some surveys, and well, great, I can create a survey in a few clicks and send it out to a couple hundred or a couple thousand people, and that can be helpful. However, it can also be damaging. That one of the challenges with surveys is garbage in, garbage out. If you're asking poor questions or not designing questions well, you're gonna, sure, you might deploy a survey, but you're not gonna get the type of information that you need or can use to make effective business decisions. So that can be a drawback. So you have to be careful on who uses the tool and how the tools are being used. Another drawback is increases in surveying in organizations. So there's an ongoing growth of surveying. So you have to balance surveys and how they're used. And I'm going to talk about some ideas on how to do that. Drafting interesting questions, drafting short questions are some ideas to be able to counterbalance the over-surveying that's going on. There is an additional investment if you want to do them right, so it's not as much as a full survey, but if you partner with good partners, they can really provide expertise and accountability on how to run effective pulse surveys, how to create management buy-in, and how to act on the results without breaking your budget. So that can be done, but there will be an investment there, both in time and some money. There is potential for reduced response rates and lower accountability of results. If you're running too many pulse surveys, there could be lower response rates, and we've noticed in pulses they can be a little bit lower. And sometimes information overload. Too much information and too much data can sometimes paralyze managers, as we've seen many times, and they don't do anything with the data. So there are some drawbacks. You have to look at the benefits, which I touched on, but there's also things you got to be aware of when going. Let me turn to the types of pulse surveys, and there's quite a range out here. Pulse surveys can range anything from 1 to 2 questions to 15, 20, or even 25 questions. So there's quite a range out there of how, and there's also quite a range of frequency of questions. For example, pulse surveys can be sent out weekly, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, every 6 months. They can be sent to specific populations, to random sampling, to the entire census. So there's lots of flexibility in the way pulse surveys can be done. But I outlined 4 sort of key ones here, and one is a snapshot. And that's really a pulse survey where you just you want to get the opinions or thoughts of a given population. Maybe you want to understand what's going on with millennials, or you want to get some feedback on a particular geographic region or particular department. You want to get a snapshot of their ideas. Maybe you just acquired a firm and you want to survey just the new employees that you brought on and get a sense of how they're being brought into the organization. So those are ways that you could deploy a snapshot pulse. Very effective for certain sample sizes or certain groups in given populations. Another tool out there or type of pulse survey is to measure performance indicators. And in this way, you're using an index score or a subset of questions to measure employee engagement, or maybe a driver of engagement. So, for example, some of our clients, what they'll do is they'll run a full survey every year, and then in different quarters, they'll run a short engagement index. Same set of questions from their full survey, but it keeps that engagement score quarterly, gets onto their balanced scorecard, gets reported to the board, it actually ties to some compensation measures. So there's lots of different ways, but that's an important, what we call a performance indicator pulse. There's also audience-specific or topic-specific. You might be targeting vendors. You could do customers, volunteers, lots of different ways to millennials I talked about. And another very common way, and it's probably the most common, is follow-up pulse surveys. And follow-up pulse surveys are often questions that are sent out maybe a month, 2 months after the action planning process has started within an organization. And of course, you might ask questions around the actual process of action. You know, did you participate in a feedback session? Did you participate in an action team or whatever they're called? You might also ask about how well the organization is doing around a particular area that they're trying to action, like leadership development or team building or training. So you're trying to get feedback early on around how well the actions are starting to take place. So the follow-up survey might be sent out 3 months or 5 or 6 months after the completion of the last full survey, trying to keep the momentum going in the full survey. So these are different ways pulse surveys are being used. Now let me give you some interesting examples beyond what you might think of as a traditional employee pulse survey. This one is from Nordstrom's, and I picked Nordstrom's because they actually, I'm in Ottawa, and they recently opened up a large flagship store in downtown Ottawa, and they have this thing called they do an annual survey, and it's called the NordDNA survey, and that goes out to all of their employees on a regular basis. But they also run a short pulse survey or feedback tool that they try to capture data from employees on a day-to-day basis. And let me show you what that looks like. This is actually a screenshot from their tool. This is the location. It's called the walk-up, so it's an actual kiosk that Nordstrom employees would go to on a floor. 6 check-ins today. That means 6 people have come in and gave a response. And it's one simple question that they ask: how do you feel today? And of course, they have little buttons, and you press, you know, you're excited, neutral, sad, angry, whatever type of feeling or mood that you have. And basically, they collect that data, and then they report that data. So you can, as a manager, you can go in, you can select the location that you want to select, the date you want to select, and you can see I just pulled this data off the tool yesterday. And, you know, there's PC and kiosk and so on. And you can quickly see the percentage of people that said they're excited and happy, neutral, sad, and angry, and so on. And I sort of thought that was interesting because it's a different way of measuring the mood or measuring the pulse of what's going on within your organization. And we're seeing more and more of these types of mood indicators or mood measures which fall under this pulse category. Let me show you another interesting one. It's, if you're not happy at work, you know, just swipe to the left to tell your boss. There's this concept from Japan called Nico Nico. Nico Nico is actually a calendar where you have each day, and you have actually a rating of level of performance or level of happiness that's happening on each day. Nico Nico is a web application. We don't have any relationship to them, but I just thought it was an interesting application where you basically indicate how happy or unhappy you are by using your smartphone. It's an iPhone application, and basically you can also make a little comment on it, and that data goes into a report, and you can sort of see the report and what it looks like. So there's an actual report from a Nico report, and it shows each day level people who scored low or people who scored high, and sort of some trend line that's going on. I don't know if traditionally Tuesdays are low days or Fridays are low days, but it'd be interesting over time to see if this trend data keeps up on a day-to-day. It'd also be interesting if, because there's some research that points to things like seasonal affective disorder, in that employees, particularly in Canada and northern U.S., tend to score lower in certain times of the year on survey data than other times because daylight hours actually affects mood. So some interesting things around how people are using pulse surveys. This is a not-for-profit organization. They actually have an employee happiness index, and they actually measure it on a day-to-day basis through a simple little app. And you can see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and this is their score. Anytime their score is above 80, it's in green. If it's in the 70s, it's in yellow. And if it's below 70, it goes down to red. Here's one day that they have it in 70s. When they first started doing this, they actually had lots of below 70, so in a month they'd have a number of reds. Over time, they've been able to address and identify that and seem to increase some of their scores anyways on engagement. So some interesting ways clients are using pulse surveys, not just through an online survey, but also other applications to spice up the approach. One last example that I want to provide is, I can't remember the name of the company, I think it's called Cellplex. It's a European company, but basically what they do is they actually put a piece of hardware within your organization, and it goes on a door, and where employees are leaving or entering the organization, how was your day today? And you can sort of indicate, green meaning good and red meaning not so good, or anywhere in between. And the data is then captured on a actual report in real time, like all of these, and you're able to see what's going on in terms of employees' moods and employees' minds and so on. So I thought not just employee surveys through a traditional Likert scale that most surveys, pulse surveys, are being done on, but different methods that we're seeing in terms of pulses and different approaches. Going back to what I talked about earlier, I think we're seeing a lot of organizations experimenting with ways to measure and capture employees' engagement level, not just on an annual or every 2-year basis, but at a much more granular level on either a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis to try to intervene around action plans much more quickly than what's before. Some of these interesting tools, I should point out, they can be set up with triggers. If you sort of get a red or get a number of reds, an email could be sent to a manager or to HR and indicate that, hey, we've got a larger number than reds than usual, what's going on. So it can be an early warning sign to managers or employees about what's going on. You don't have to wait for the full year or full 2 years before your next survey comes up. So that's some interesting examples. The next couple of minutes, I just want to show you what are some top 10 pulse questions. So when you say, well, when you're running these pulse surveys, what do you do? Well, a lot of these, what we call snapshot surveys, so these are either 1-question or 2-question surveys that get put out. What type of questions that you ask, and we've asked these questions with a number of our clients, but things like, how are you feeling about coming to work every morning? Or does your manager inspire you? And these are 1-question answers that we ask people. Choose 5 words that best describe how you feel about coming to work. Or do you feel valued for the work you do? Other sample on a 1 to 10 scale. How likely do you see yourself working here in 1 year? People have to rate it on a 1 to 10. How happy are you at work? Or how valued do you feel at work? These types of questions. What do you love about your job? And what we've noticed is, after a while, if you keep asking these same questions, response rates go down. One way to enhance response rates is to add interesting questions. And these interesting questions can actually maybe, as we learn more about them, tell you a lot about your organization. We've even asked questions, if your company were an animal, what would it be? To be able to understand how people perceive your brand as an organization. And I think there's lots of different ways to be creative around capturing data and capturing interesting insights into what employees are feeling on a more granular level beside the annual employee engagement survey. So let me just turn now to a pulse survey that we launch and how we deploy it. I want to give you some examples of what they look like, and then I'll wrap up with some summary thoughts, and then I think there might be 1 or 2 questions that Bernie has. It looks like he's flagged me on a couple there. So we have a tool called Talent Pulse, and it's a great survey application. It's all online, software as a service. It's administered in real time. It's a brief pulse survey. It can use random sampling, or we can do entire census. What's nice about the work we do, it is scientific. So we do, when we're deploying, if you're going to be using it for measuring engagement indexes, or using it as performance-related data, or using it for balanced scorecard types of initiatives, it's very important to not just toss that stuff out on SurveyMonkey, but actually take the time to make sure you're designing the questions right. And that's one of the services we provide in any pulse survey, is making sure that it's built with the science, the validity, the reliability that's important. What allows, though, also our tool allows you to manage trends in real time, so you can go on in real time and see what people are saying. You can be set as identifiable or not identifiable, and it really depends on what the respondent wants. And of course, it allows you to track evolution over time. So some of the approaches we have, the benefits that we're seeing with our clients of using our Pulse application, it generates really meaningful conversations. So people are starting to talk about the data on a more frequent method or more frequent regularity than they have in the past. So it doesn't become, well, we're talking about engagement in the fall for 2 days or 3 days and then we're back to regular business. It becomes an ongoing discussion at the boardroom and the executive table. The other thing is it allows teams, so you can actually deploy it in small groups or teams. It doesn't have to be to the whole organization. So managers in a let's say a software development environment or IT environment, I just want to deploy it and see how things are working within my team, and they can get early warning signals of what's going on. We also can provide alerts. So people can send out, we can send out alerts around things or around feedback to employees, or we can send messages if scores are different than what we cost. And our costing is very cost competitive in that we either offer a flat rate or a per demand per team on a user per month basis. Lots of deployment methods. Most of the stuff's done on BlackBerry, iPhone, iPad, and that's how we deploy our survey. Now let me turn to a very typical example of a Pulse survey that we've deployed with a lot of our clients. So what we've done is we've often gone in and worked with our client and done a full engagement survey. And then that full engagement survey produces a number of key drivers. In this example of a real client, here's their key drivers: professional growth, senior leadership, and immediate management. After that analysis, what we've done within 6 months, then we go back and we survey on engagement and 1 or 2 of the or 3 of the key drivers. So when we go back and send a short follow-up Pulse survey, all we're doing is asking 6 questions about engagement and maybe an additional 10 or 15 questions that come from the professional growth, senior leadership, and immediate management, because those are the topics that the organization are working on, and those are the things that employees should be seeing improvements on. So we want to pulse on those things to see how well they're doing. So for example, this is an example of a Pulse survey of an actual client. I changed the name of the actual company, called it ABC. It's not American Broadcasting Corporation. It's a different, just ABC. But you know, they get welcome to the Pulse survey, a bit of a description. Then they get a couple of Pulse questions. In this example, we're measuring engagement. You know, I'm proud to tell others I work for ABC. We ask a couple of questions around thinking of leaving. And then we ask, if you could deliver one message to your executive team, what would it be? So 1 open-ended question and 6 Likert-based questions and 2 yes/no questions. And they're able to then also write an open-ended comment and submit their survey. So it takes less than 5 minutes to complete, and it gives fantastic update data throughout the survey process that they wouldn't have naturally had with a survey that runs every year or every 2 years. When we do a detailed Pulse report, so sometimes you might want more than just an online report, and this is an example of a detailed Pulse report where this organization, because they use their engagement data for a lot of different reasons, were able to actually produce quite a bit of analysis on their, even though we just asked 6 engagement questions, we can break that data down by different departments, by different questions. We can see where the hot spots are and so on, because we're able to link the data or the surveys back to individuals throughout the process. We also, for some of our clients, launch quick weekly, monthly, or even quarterly one-question surveys. Here's one of our one-question survey on a 10-point scale. You see yourself working here in 1 year? No, I have 1 foot out the door, or yes, I love my company, and 1 open-ended to please explain. Again, a very quick survey that goes out on a weekly basis to our clients to be able to see where employees are more on the mood side. So lots of different approaches. This is an example of the actual Pulse you'd get on real-time results. So you're able to see on a 10-point scale the percentage of people that, rated a 5, a 6, a 7, a 9, your average, the benchmark in here, number of replies, and so on in terms of the survey data that comes in. So lots of different approaches, but our survey approach usually with pulses are a more detailed pulse survey that's scientifically driven, and you're able to use it for measurement and scorecard and action planning, or a shorter mood survey or pulse survey that I just showed you here, sort of keep the breadth of what's going on and keep the awareness high. Maybe less of a scientific approach, but more of a awareness building and approach to engagement. So let me just sort of wrap up here. I guess before I jump into sort of the closing remarks on pulse surveys, I think this is an interesting thing to think about. 80% of firms run surveys, and it's probably even a little bit more than that, but a lot of surveys run annual or regular employee engagement surveys. But when we looked at the research, what we found, only about half or 40% consistently act on the results. And that's one of the things, no matter what you use, whether you're using a full engagement survey, a pulse survey, a kiosk type of mood indicator at your company, technology is just an enabler. It's not a solution to engagement. And our view on pulse surveys is that pulse surveys are not a substitute for a regular full content census survey. You get so much great information, and so much information that's scientifically based, that's been studied and understood, so you could actually act with a lot of confidence and allocate resources, people, money, time, budget, to an area to improve engagement, which will have business outcomes in a positive way. Where pulse surveys, on the other hand, are early on in our understanding of how they can be used effectively, and I think we're still experimenting. So I don't really believe they're a great substitute for regular full-time consensus surveys. And as I mentioned, technology is not the solution to engagement. The solution relates to leadership, management, and education. But technology can be a great enabler. And used effectively, pulse surveys can be a very effective process to help measure on what's going on a more granular level than what can be done on annual or semi-annual surveys. And the kiss of death really is action planning. Whether it's a full survey or a pulse survey, or you're running both, it really doesn't matter. The lack of action is really the kiss of death for any type of employee survey. So no matter the process, it doesn't matter the approach, it's taking action can really booster whether you do pulse or full or both, and non-taking action can really hurt the process. I do want to make you aware, just as I wrap up, of a beta program we're launching in the fall of this year. We're providing this program and allows for weekly, monthly, one-question pulse surveys, and you can send it to all employees or a subset of employees. It's managed by TalentMap, so we'll manage the system. It's run on our new TalentGate system that is being launched in September. We administer it with the client, so we work with you to identify who to send the pulse. And we're actually offering a free program. So for the first 6 months, clients can use our pulse platform for free. And that's a beta application, so one of the things we will be hoping for or looking for is feedback from our beta clients. And the reporting mechanism is you'll get online reporting. So you'll be able to deploy your survey, customize, pick from a library of surveys, or create your own, and be able to actually access online reports and see what the pulse is. We'll be running this program over a 6-month period of time. And again, if you're interested or want to learn more about it, feel free to contact me, Sean Fitzpatrick. I'm at TalentMap, or you can email me, sfitzpatrick@TalentMap, and I'm very happy to tell you more about the program and see if you're interested in participating in it on an ongoing basis. I'm going to stop there. I know I've used up most of my time. I try to leave a few minutes left for if there's any questions. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Bernie, for you to wrap up.
Certainly. So just one quick question about what size of an organization would be minimum for them to launch a pulse survey?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we've launched pulse surveys with both small and large organizations, and what we found is a pulse survey. Once you get beyond about 25 employees, what we find is a simple pulse survey can be an effective tool to measure. And what happens at about 25 to 50 employees, you start to have managers of managers. So your executives don't necessarily connect directly to the frontline staff anymore. So they're getting secondhand information through their managers as to level of engagement, what's going on, and so on. So a pulse survey can be a very useful tool, even with a small organization, to be able to get direct feedback to the CEO as to what people feel and what people think out there. So the smallest organization we have is actually 12 people that use our tool. So you can see some very small organizations use it, but on general, 25 to 50 is where you probably are in terms of starting, and then go from there.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you very much for your insight and valuable tips today.
And I noticed there's a couple of other questions. Do we want to address those other questions, or do you want to address them later?
Sure. Oh, I do have one more that may be of interest to larger organizations. Do you think a pulse survey is risky when undergoing a large organizational change such as a takeover?
That's a good question. In terms of a takeover, you sort of have to, timing is very important in any question, survey deployment. And what we found was we've deployed surveys prior to a takeover and post to a takeover. So for example, and it's provided great information for clients. So one of the companies was a European telecom was about to buy a company in Montreal. It was a company of about 100 people, but their engagement scores were actually low. We had been doing their engagement scores for a couple of years. And when they're doing the due diligence, this telecom found that, and they wanted to work with this company to improve their engagement before they finalized the actual purchase of it. So we actually ran some pulse surveys over a monthly period with this Montreal company to improve engagement, or at least to measure engagement. Their management team improved it. And then they bought the company and did a follow-up pulse. So it can be used in very specific circumstances. Another client we have, every time they acquire a firm, we do a post-acquisition survey, which could be deemed as a pulse survey. So lots of different ways to deploy a survey in an acquisition stage. And one other question asked about the pulse survey. Is it available on as an app or a smartphone? It is available on a smartphone, so it is mobile friendly. It's built in HTML5, so it identifies the application that you're seeking or you're using, and it will respond, or the web pages will be sent back in if you're on an iPhone or Android or tablet or whatever. So absolutely it does. Perfect. And if any other questions come in, please email them in. Happy to address them or answer them at any time in the future. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sean. We're just coming up on the hour, so I just want to point out that we have another webinar coming out next month, August 13th, titled Engaging Your Employees Through a Compelling Organizational Vision. So we hope you'll join us for that session, and you can register directly online at talentmap.com. And thank you all once again for attending this informative webinar.